Everybody, hello, hello, welcome. We are just so excited to welcome you to today's session. I have this very large iPad I have to navigate, so I'm going to just put this right here. But I want to, here we go. Welcome everyone to our Sustaining Momentum, Ensuring Long-Term Impact of Climate Action session. It's wonderful to see such a diverse and passionate group here today, so thank you for taking the time. Thank you for coming to see us and start thinking about all the wonderful action plans you're going to do as a result of it. We're at this really critical moment in history. Climate legislation is transforming industries, policies, communities across the United States, and it's vital that we continue this momentum. My name is Angela Barranco, and I'm the Executive Director at Climate Group North America. And today's session is all about securing the future and ensuring the enduring impact of the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as navigating the evolving legal and political landscape. We'll hear from some of the brightest minds and leaders who are on the front lines of these efforts, so let's go ahead and dive in. I am very honored and thrilled to introduce our first speaker, someone who has been a trailblazer in climate leadership for decades. And while he needs no introduction, I'll give a very quick one. Governor Jay Inslee has spent decades championing clean energy and bold environmental policies, from his early days as a legislator in the state of Washington to his service in Congress, and now as governor. Jay Inslee has been a tireless advocate for climate action, building a sustainable future and creating jobs through innovation. Under his leadership, Washington State has become a model for clean energy transformation, and many of the policies and programs of the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law came from his climate plan that he proposed during his presidential campaign in 2019. So please join me in welcoming Governor Jay Inslee. Governor, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you.
So I'm going to just jump right in because I think folks are eager to hear from you. Can you tell us a little bit more? So the Inflation Reduction Act has been hailed as one of the most significant pieces of climate legislation in U.S. history. As someone who has been a longtime advocate for clean energy, how do you view IRA's role in transforming America's approach to climate action, and what makes this law in particular such a critical turning point for our nation's clean energy future?
Well, I think it's the equivalent of the adoption of the forward pass in football. It's that international significance. It really is. You cannot overstate the significance, what it's doing for my state. I mean, you know, just one example. So I met a guy named Rick Luby years ago. He started a little company wiring capacitors, trying to figure out how to make a new battery. And now he's building a 6-story manufacturing plant for one of the most advanced silicon anode battery companies in the world. It's going to increase your EV's range by 30%. With less space and less weight. And he got going because of the Inflation Reduction Act. He had a little $100 million assistance to be able to do it. And his competitor, because we like to be fair as Democrats, another company called Sila, it's right down the road, and they both are doing great business. And that is just happening all over the United States. There has never been a more productive, rapid, and national job creation program except for the military buildup in World War II. And so you cannot overstate this. And the other thing is, it's in partnership with our states. It's in partnership with my state, the things we're doing with our Climate Commitment Act, our own investment, our 100% clean electricity. It's just a great partnership. And by the way, thanks for mentioning my bill. It's not just my bill, it's the state's bill, and so many others have been doing great things. Reuven Carlisle, my colleagues in the state senate who helped get this through. It's just great to have a partnership. And so you can't overstate its impact.
That's amazing. I mean, I think we're all so thrilled, and I love the framing that you're giving. I think given that all of these investments have really accelerated this transition, how do we sustain the momentum? Because it's not just, you know, the one and done, right? We're going to have to keep this going for quite some time. And so, you know, what makes it difficult for future administrations to undo this progress, but also when we're looking specific at automotive industries or others who have already embraced the direction, and how do we keep that going?
You bet. Well, first let's talk about the benefits we have, the luck that we've had. We're kind of lucky in this regard in several ways. Number one, Donald Trump has said windmills cause cancer, but he has yet to say that they cause killing cats and dogs. So this is a good thing that maybe next week we don't know. But the most important thing we've got momentum is that the benefits are being shared so widely across the nation. They're happening in Georgia. You'll hear Ali Zaidi talk about the job creation, which, by the way, is labor intensive. He has a very important statistic that the union intensity in clean energy jobs are twice the rest of the U.S. economy. That's one of the reasons the labor community is so committed to continuing this momentum, and we're in good shape in this regard. Now, the other good things we got going for us is that in most, not all, but most of the direct appropriations, most of it's committed pretty much and out the door. So a significant part of the Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, much of that is out the door. It's possible to slow down a portion of it, but it's going to be unlikely, frankly, I think, because we have so many people around the country who are recognizing these job creation benefits. So if Trump ended up in the White House, he's going to run into a bunch of legislators saying, not my district, you're not going to cut my jobs. And these are Republicans, too. There's already been over a dozen Republicans said, slow down, boss. I'm part of your cult, but keep your hands off this job creation opportunity in my district, in Georgia and Texas and whatnot. So we've got a lot of things that are kind of locked in this regard. But obviously, we're not out of the woods. We are very at risk, if I can pivot to the risks we have right now. We have risks in the 111D rule, which Trump can countermand, arguably through executive action, and or his handpicked Supreme Court could eviscerate. That is very much at risk. So that leads to the fact that our state's going to have to be continued to be very active in our state efforts to get to 100% electoral grid, as we did several years ago in the state of Washington. That means we're going to have to, on our own effort, increase siting and permitting actions to accelerate them so we can get these things in the ground and get going before Trump can get his hands on them. So that is a tremendous risk. The second risk is in the automotive sector, where although we've got a significant amount of our charging station infrastructure dollars out, not all of it is out. That is at risk. And importantly, our policies we've adopted in partnership with California is very much at risk as well, both from executive action by Trump and from his handpicked Supreme Court. So those things are very at risk. So two of our great segments, which is the electrical grid and our transportation grid, we are at significant risk. And that's why we need somebody else, and I have a couple people, one of whom I'll be introducing tonight, that I think would be really good at not allowing that to happen.
Yes, I love it. You know, I love how you touch so much on the states. You're such a champion for state-level action, and we really appreciate all of the work that you do there. Can you talk to us a little bit more about this labor union and job creation? I mean, because you make such an important point with labor unions such as IBEW that you've worked with so closely. How do we keep those relationships positive and moving forward and organized around climate policy, right? How does support for these essentially, ensure long-term federal, implications of it?
Well, the first thing to do is make sure when we talk about job creation, it's just not any old job. It's a family wage job that gives people a career advancement throughout their careers. And we're doing that and succeeding in that, in part because in my state and other states, we have incentives for when we make these public investments. You get credit for having apprenticeships, for having union participation. So in our 100% clean grid bill, we have an incentive program if you're an employer who has labor project agreements, who has apprenticeship programs, that will result in increasing participation by unions so that we can get a family wage job, not just any job. And there is some of that in the federal government policies as well. We've got to maintain those. So far, I got to tell you, they've been really successful. Ollie was talking today, and he rightfully is proud that under Biden and Harris, the clean energy job sector has twice the union penetration, twice the union membership per capita as the rest of the U.S. economy. So we're rocking it when it comes to actually creating good paying jobs, well-represented jobs, not just any job. So we got to keep the right people in charge to continue that work, and building into every one of these climate policies two things. One, incentives for actually good pay in these jobs, and second, environmental justice broadly speaking, including making sure that our investment go to communities that are disproportionately impacted. In our bill, our Climate Commitment Act, for instance, we now have 35% of all the investments have to be with those disproportionately impacted communities of poverty, frequently communities of color, and an additional 10% to tribal communities that have been victimized so much by pollution. So combination of making sure we've got apprenticeship, union participation, and direct investment to the communities that have suffered, those things will serve us well. And it's one of the reasons we have such large public support for these activities. So I feel good about continuing this momentum.
I love it. The time always goes way too fast. So my final question to you, how can we all, what is the challenge to all of us to help you and others keep the progress continuing and ensure these benefits keep moving forward in communities across the United States?
Well, everybody has power here, not just governors or Olive or anybody else. Everybody in this room has power, and I've come to empower you. Everybody in this room is empowered to impact several other people to get involved in this effort. Certainly in voting, and I'm not here to tell you who to vote for, but I can tell you voting is the single most important thing you do, and you can influence people individually. Your organizations can influence people. So I hope you will exercise that license, and this is free. And I'm really serious about this. I think individuals who are not, governors or senators do not recognize their power to be leaders in their own community and how necessary that is to create a normative situation in your organization, in your family, in your neighborhood, that it is not acceptable to vote in a way that's going to destroy the planet. That's just not acceptable. So I want to empower you. It's the single most important thing I could do here in New York to use your leadership capabilities. I hope you'll do so. And if you vote in Washington, that's even more important. So, by the way, it is important this year. There's an attempt to roll back our Climate Commitment Act, and I'm not advocating how you will vote on that. I'm advising you that the Climate Commitment Act is really working. You be the judge how to vote.
Couldn't have said it better. Thank you, Governor Inslee. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Well, and with that, thank you, Governor Inslee. We love always having you here with us. I have the great pleasure next of introducing a wonderful leader in regulatory and environmental law, Administrator Ricky Rivez. Serves as the administrator for the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. With a distinguished career as a professor and dean at NYU School of Law, Richard is recognized as one of the leading voices in climate change and regulatory policy. His work has shaped how we think about protecting the environment through legal frameworks. Please join me in welcoming Administrator Rivez to discuss federal climate policy in today's challenging legal landscape.
Thanks so much, Angela. And good afternoon. I'm very grateful to the Climate Group for hosting this wonderful event, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you. For the last 2 years, I've had the honor to serve as the administrator of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, or OIRA, which is part of the White House Office of Management and Budget. If you've never heard of it, you're in very good company. When the media writes about us, they normally call us obscure, and on good days, they call us obscure but important. I hope today is a good day, but I'm not sure. So OIRA coordinates the centralized review of agency regulations, bringing together legal and policy experts throughout the executive branch to ensure that agency rules are consistent with the law, the president's priorities, and available evidence. And in addition to coordinating interagency review, OIRA houses economists, scientists, and other policy experts who bring their own insights to bear in the rulemaking process to ensure that the analytical grounding of regulations that go out of this process is as strong as it can be, for reasons that will become clear in just a couple of minutes. This year has been an extraordinarily productive one for my agency, particularly on the climate change front. For example, during the 3-month period between mid-February and mid-May, we concluded a review on 135 significant final rules, including numerous rules with enormous climate change consequences. In March, EPA, under the distinguished leadership of Administrator Regan, who will be with you a little later today, finalized the strongest ever pollution standards for motor vehicles, which Governor Inslee mentioned. And these are expected to avoid 7 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions through 2055. The next month, EPA finalized emission standards for fossil fuel-fired power plants that will reduce carbon pollution by another 1.4 billion metric tons through 2047. Other agencies also issued rules this spring that will significantly reduce emissions or promote renewable energy. The Department of Energy issued efficiency standards for a suite of appliances, including water heaters, air conditioners, and dishwashers. The Department of Transportation completed vehicle standards imposing a fleet-wide average of over 50 miles per gallon by model year 2031. And the Department of the Interior finalized rules to streamline the generation of clean energy on public lands, and I could go on for a long time. With these and other key rules completed, many are now being challenged before courts, and this is a challenge that Governor Inslee also mentioned. And these courts have become increasingly skeptical of federal regulation in recent years. And I'll discuss the challenges I face as a policy official, and will not be providing any legal analysis of any pending case. That's a job for other colleagues in the federal government. So, as has been already discussed, and everyone knows, earlier this year, the Supreme Court overturned Chevron deference, which is a 40-year-old doctrine that required courts to defer to agency reasonable interpretations of ambiguous statutes. The overruling of Chevron empowers courts to exercise their own judgment in deciding the best statutory reading. But though highly consequential, this decision was largely expected, as the Supreme Court hadn't applied Chevron deference in about 8 years. Another doctrinal shift is the emergence of a newly muscular major questions doctrine that has unsettled the bounds of agency authority to regulate issues of quote unquote vast economic and political significance, which of course are in the eye of the judges reviewing regulations. Notably, the Supreme Court announced this doctrine in assessing the legality of the Obama administration's greenhouse gas emission standards for the power sector, which the court found adopted what it called an unheralded approach under the applicable statutory provision. I should say that at the time, before I was in the government, I wrote an amicus brief explaining how the regulatory approach was consistent with lots of regulations the agency had done over several decades. And I was actually proud that my brief was cited by the Supreme Court, though unfortunately it was cited in Justice Kagan's dissent and not in the Chief Justice's majority opinion. Now, while the major questions doctrine's contours remain unsettled, it has been interpreted very expansively by certain lower courts, with some applying a heightened standard of review for many rules, which they claim have large political significance, novelty, or breadth. And again, all of these terms are in the eyes of the beholder. There's also been a recent shift in arbitrary and capricious review, which is what courts apply to evaluate the substantive grounding for regulations. Arbitrary and capricious review asks whether an agency rule is a product of rational analysis. Formally, this is a deferential standard, but courts are now applying it far more rigorously. So, for example, I mean, this pattern was on full display in the Supreme Court's decision this past June in a case called Ohio versus EPA, a very significant case involving EPA's regulation of pollution that crosses state lines, and the court stayed ozone standards, finding that the agency's response to one public comment wasn't as detailed as it might have been. In addition to these doctrinal challenges, shifting litigation patterns have further complicated the pattern for federal rules and made it even more vital that agencies consider litigation risk during the rulemaking process. For instance, an increase in forum and judge shopping means that litigants often bring claims before courts and judges they perceive as sympathetic to their cause. And I think many of you have started hearing about judges in Wichita Falls and Shreveport and places like that. Nationwide injunctions in which courts block a rule from taking into effect early in the litigation have become increasingly common, particularly by judges in these far-flung sections of judicial districts in Texas and Louisiana and other southern states. And the evolution of state attorneys general into active litigants against federal regulations increases the odds that any significant rule is challenged in court. Okay, this all sounds pretty depressing, so I'll now tell you like the good part, because I don't want to end with like a, dark thought. So these various shifts contribute to litigation risk for agency regulations. And OIRA has used the regulatory review process to mitigate that risk and help protect agency rules against legal challenges in this shifting landscape. By bringing together legal and policy experts from across the executive branch, our review process has helped ensure that significant rules have a strong legal and analytical foundation. For example, starting long before the Supreme Court overturned Chevron, agencies often did not rely on the doctrine in issuing their rules, and instead explained, as they should now, how they were applying the law consistent with the best statutory reading. It puts some additional burden on agencies, but in many cases, it's a burden that agencies can meet. Agencies have also increasingly focused on explaining why their regulations implementing a statutory provision are consistent with their long-standing approach to the issue. Doing so is important as a result of courts' recognition in both major questions cases and the decision overturning Chevron deference that the government's long-standing interpretation of a statute can provide powerful evidence of its meaning. And through our process, we make sure that agencies discuss the regulatory antecedents that would support future challenges. Policy experts in OIRA and throughout government also review regulations to ensure they contain robust records that assess regulatory impacts, respond to comments, and justify the agency's policy choice. This puts our regulations on strong footing, even against the most rigorous, arbitrary, and capricious review. Now, people often ask me, what are you doing to make sure this regulation is not successfully challenged in court? And the truth of the matter is, given these patterns that I talked about and these challenges, it's really impossible to guarantee that a regulation is not going to be successfully challenged in court. But if we do our work well, and I think we are doing it well, we increase the probability that the regulation will be upheld. And that's what our process can do, and that's what we are focused on doing. And that's significant. So I'd like to close with 3 points. First, the new legal landscape undoubtedly raises challenges. There is nothing we can do to ensure that every rule promulgated by executive branch agencies will be upheld. But as I said, I'm confident that OIRA's work increases the probability that the regulations we review will survive judicial scrutiny. Second, increased judicial scrutiny applies to both regulatory and deregulatory rules. So because interpretive consistency over time is favored under the new judicial doctrines. So as a result, our regulations that withstand judicial review may be more difficult for a future administration to try to successfully roll back. So that's kind of a potentially nice note in all of this. Of course, the prerequisite is having our regulation upheld. Finally, and most importantly, as this administration's climate record demonstrates, agencies are producing consequential rules that follow statutory mandates, contain robust records, and deliver vast benefits to the American people. Such rules are consistent with evolving judicial doctrines and are in a good position to withstand judicial review, even in today's more challenging landscape. So thanks so much for bearing with me to talk about these pretty wonky things, as is appropriate from someone running an obscure agency. And you can decide later whether it's important or not. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Administrator Rivez. That was really great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sydney Snow. I am the head of programs for Climate Group North America, and I'm really excited to welcome you here today for what promises to be an engaging and insightful conversation on the evolving regulatory landscape and climate policy, a little bit about what the administrator was just talking about. We're joined by Administrator Michael Regan, who has been leading the charge on environmental protection and policy. Administrator Regan's journey from his roots in North Carolina and to spearheading initiatives like the largest coal ash cleanup in U.S. history shows how environmental protection and economic prosperity go hand in hand. Today, we'll hear his thoughts on how recent shifts, like the Supreme Court's Chevron deference decision, are shaping both federal and state climate strategies. Please join me in welcoming Administrator of the EPA, Michael Regan. Administrator, it's really great to have you, especially nice to share stage with an Aggie Pride.
Aggie Pride.
Let's start by talking about the big picture. So with recent Supreme Court rulings, particularly the end of the Chevron deference decision, how do you see the balance of power shifting between state and federal governments when it comes to advancing climate policy?
Well, thank you for the question, and you all heard Ricky sort of lay out the basic framework. It's a really interesting place that we find ourselves in as a country. You know, for decades, Congress has deferred to agencies to build up the intellectual capacity to execute on Congress's will to protect clean air and clean water. So America needs a strong EPA. At the same time, this ruling begins to constrain or potentially constrict the agency's ability to be innovative and creative. And so for an agency like EPA, people talk all the time and say that we push out regulations. The fact is they're actually technology standards. And so as we look at advanced technologies to reduce pollution to air and water, as we think about the integration of AI and robotics, it's really unfortunate that we may relegate some of these decisions to courts who don't have the technical expertise, who don't have the scientific background, who aren't able to really keep up with the pace of the changing markets the way we can at EPA and other agencies. So I'm optimistic that we can figure it out, but it's yet another hurdle thrown at us as we're trying to deal with crises, climate crisis, drinking water, infrastructure crisis. And so I'm optimistic, but it's going to cause us to work a little harder as we truly evaluate what does this ruling mean for the future of all of these agencies.
Yeah, I need a little bit of your optimism. So do you think we're moving to a more decentralized approach when it comes to climate action as a result of living in this post-Chevron world?
I don't think so. I've been on a couple of panels this morning. The future is really about the power of partnership. And so what we're seeing all across the country, first of all, let me say, I travel all across the country, and it's refreshing. The country doesn't truly reflect the rhetoric of Washington, D.C. And so I see Republican and Democratic mayors and governors getting things done, investing in technology, cleaning up pollution. And so when I think about the role of the federal government matched with the aggressive innovation of some of our governors and our mayors, we're hitting every level of government to chase innovation and being globally competitive, while also understanding the power of public-private partnerships. Luckily for us, markets, technology, new business models are trending in the direction that we're trying to structure regulations, and we're starting to see the meeting of public policy regulations and market trends. We just need to have the flexibility to keep up with that. And decisions like Chevron could, again, potentially slow the ability for this country to compete against countries like China and others who are on this path to own the clean energy economy. We're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar economy. So this is just as much about winning the global foot race from an economic standpoint as it is from protecting the planet and protecting public health.
Yeah. So with these new legal realities, it seems like the way federal agencies operate has changed significantly. So how does the EPA plan to continue to safeguard policies like the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and what's the strategy to really ensure that these foundational policies remain effective despite the legal challenges?
Well, I did say earlier I was optimistic, and there may be a little cynicism for the good. What I mean by that is, when I came into office, we knew that we did not have a sympathetic court system. Mm-hmm. We knew that the courts had been stacked and the courts were becoming more and more conservative. So as I began to develop the regulatory agenda based on the president's vision in concert with working with Ricky and his staff, we had to do something called measure twice and cut once. We had to be really, really focused and ensure that the regulations that we were pushing through were well within the bounds of the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. Not quite as innovative as we would have liked, but because we took the time, we know that we have very strong, durable rules governing transportation, governing our stationary sources, looking at forever chemicals. And so I'm really confident that we've developed very solid, durable rules. The only thing I would say is we had to develop them with a conservative court system in mind, which means we're not meeting the expectation of the general public. And I think that's the thing that stings the most, is knowing that we could push a little harder if we had a balanced court to do everything that we need to do to protect public health and the environment.
Yeah. Well, that kind of brings me to my next question. So, we've seen states step up in a big way, especially since these rulings. How do you see the EPA supporting state governments in their climate initiatives while keeping everything really aligned with some of the federal goals that we have? And also, is there more room for states to lead the charge?
Well, listen, I have to say, as a former state regulator, especially during the previous administration, the states and mayors did lead. The federal government did not lead in the previous administration. So we know that the states are capable of doing so. And as a former state regulator, now as the EPA administrator, I have embraced the leadership of our state regulators and our governors and our mayors. There's a proper role of government for the federal government, and that is to ensure that all of our states are doing what they need to do to protect the public. And so while we have a lot of states that are moving boldly and aggressively, we do have some states that I believe abdicate their responsibilities to ensure that no one is left behind. Yeah. And so I'm excited about the role that states play in this pursuit of a clean energy economy, ensuring that all children have access to clean water and clean air. But I'm also reminded that every now and again, we do have to step in to ensure that each and every state is meeting that obligation.
Absolutely. So as we look ahead, how do you see the role of the federal and state governments really evolving together to sustain that long-term climate action? And then with the regulatory landscape, and as it continues to shift, I'm sure it still will, how do we maintain the momentum in the face of political and legal challenges?
I think we have to do more of what President Biden and Vice President Harris asked us to do, which is to focus on the problem and the people and not the politics. And I'll give a good example. I just gave a $300 million grant to Jim Pillen, the governor of Nebraska, to do some climate-smart agriculture. We have to talk about that and tell more stories, not just highlight the partisan divisions, but also think about the bipartisan solutions that exist across the country. So I think the future is thinking through how we articulate more frequently the positive relationships that we do have with our Democratic and Republican governors, build that relationship, and leverage the intellectual capacity of our mayors, governors, and federal government to chase this future that I believe is bright for every single person in the country.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. You gave me a little bit more hope than I walked in here with. So thank you for that. I think we all can agree that navigating these complex regulatory challenges is no easy feat, right? So what's clear is that strength comes from collaboration. Yes. So especially between the federal and state agencies. So thank you, Administrator Regan. Really appreciate you being here, for sharing your perspectives and reminding us that despite challenges, there's always room for progress.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Thank you all.
Next up, we're diving into a critical conversation on next generation policy innovations and how industry can drive forward the clean energy transition. Leading the discussion is Reuven Carlisle, founder of Earth Finance and former Washington State Senator, along with our panelists, Rebecca Kiyava, President and CEO of NextEra Energy Resources, the largest generator of renewable energy from wind and solar. Please join me in welcoming Reuven and Rebecca to the stage.
Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you. Thanks for joining us. I'm Reuven Carlisle, founder of Earth Finance, and I had the great honor for the last 14 years of serving as a Washington State Senator and all of the fabulous legislation that our good and gracious Governor Jay Inslee got to talk about. Those were all my bills, and I'm the one that got the votes over the line with my partnership with him. It was just a great joy. Rebecca and I are super excited to talk with you today. Look, we had a wonderful morning conversation about the strategic and the academic issues. Those are super important. We want to talk a little bit about the practitioner reality at the state level. Governor Bill Ritter is here, my good friend Senator Josh Becker from California, Senator Henry Stern, so many other thought leaders at the state and local level make real action happen in climate. And what that means is we have to get serious about the reality on the ground of new renewable energy. Rebecca's role with NextEra is it's almost a symbolic representation of the work that we have to do to accelerate renewable energy. Climate action is energy. And energy is climate, and that's why in the 80-20 rule of all of this work, we got to get our game on. So Rebecca, thanks for joining us. We are so excited to learn about the real deal on the front lines, about how NextEra is leading this effort, how policy comes into play, and what you think some of the opportunities are. So
well,
welcome.
I'm thrilled to be here. The game is on for sure.
That's right. So I think the fundamental question, Rebecca, on the table is, from a practitioner point of view, we've got policies, we've got programs, we've got the federal incentives. Give us one or two insights into the reality on the ground of what it takes to get this next level of energy developed. What are some of the real deal challenges?
I think it's a great question because I think in many respects, the easy part of this transition has already happened. So we've gotten up to just shy of 20% of our energy coming from renewables, on trajectory to get to 40%, hopefully in the next decade. And what does that mean? That means going from 140 gigawatts of renewables being deployed over the last 7 years to 375 to 450 gigawatts of renewables and storage in the next 7 years. So it does a lot of more and more. It is commercialization, it's innovation, it's policy, it's partnership, across government and commercial interests. From our perspective, we hope to deploy 36 to 46 gigawatts just in the next 4 years. So that is a ton of investment, that's a ton of planning, it's a ton of partnerships across our sector, whether it's public power entities, investor-owned utilities, partners in the government legislatures, governors, and of course, really counting on and appreciating all of the support that we as an industry have gotten through the Inflation Reduction Act. But if I say, what are a couple of the key pinch points that are going to happen in the next couple of years, you already touched on a little bit from a policy perspective. It's around permitting, it's around transmission reform, being able to ensure that not only can we get these resources connected to the grid, but they can actually deliver the electrons to those that need to get it. It was imperative for us to address these issues as we were going through the transition. It is imperative today, now that we address them, as we also see a tremendous amount of growth across our sector, unlike we've seen in decades. And it's not just data centers, and I know we're talking a lot about data centers this week, and that is an important part of the conversation, but it's also industrialization. It's also manufacturing coming to the United States, and we need to be able to support that growth.
So when you think about the growth and the demand, we've got data centers and artificial intelligence. We have the electrification of transportation. We also have these 100% clean energy bills at the state, the federal level. Those goals, in many ways, are aspirational, as we know. But what they're not is necessarily connected to the operational reality of, as you said, getting siting and getting interconnection. Who's doing it right? Where is there interconnection that's working, or where are there siting support systems from a policy point of view that folks at the state level can learn from?
I think there are different attributes that are positive in different parts of the United States. As one example, and I'll highlight the MISO, the Midwest System Operator, they have done a really nice job looking out now over a decade plus out in the future and saying, what do we need in terms of the resource adequacy, both from a capacity and the energy standpoint, to meet a variety of scenarios. And then they have laid out the grid investments that they need, both high voltage as well as the immediate voltage, in order to be able to connect these resources from where they're likely to be sourced to where they need to get to the customers that want to use them. That type of forward vision is what was anticipated in the rules passed by FERC last year, that we want all of the system operators to be thinking about, not just out a couple of years, but out multiple years and in a variety of scenarios in order to make the long-term investments that we need to see. But it's not just the planning side. We also need actual permitting. We need to be able to get these linear facilities in service. And then, of course, we need to figure out who's going to pay. And paying it is a hard one at the end of the day. If you just think of a simple example, state A, state B, state C. State A is where all these resources are located. State C is who's going to benefit, getting those electrons to where they need. And state B gets to site the transmission that goes across their state. But they're neither sourcing nor benefiting from the electrons. As you can imagine, state B wants to know what's in it for them. And I think that's the tough policy question that we really need to get to. Obviously, my example is a simple one. It's fortunately not that simple in a lot of places. There are a lot of benefits to consider, but that's a tough policy question that many state legislatures and regulators need to face.
It is, and you can imagine a state like Montana, which has wind assets incredible, and then you need transmission through Montana, through a northern tip of Idaho into Washington State where it's used. So we, I think, in our region have a deep, deep appreciation for that. Super quick question, financing. If you look at the market's need for some degree of clarity and consistency of policies to be able to finance billions of dollars of assets like this, where are the markets going? What are the markets looking for in terms of the ability to do that level of financing?
Well, let me just take a single company in context. That's our company. We plan to invest $100 billion in America's electrical infrastructure in the next 4 years. We can't do that without financing partners. And we are just one company of many that need to make significant investments. So that visibility of what the policy is going to look like, the durability of being able to count on it over a long period of time in order to be able to earn the returns on capital, whether it's debt financing or equity financing, is imperative. So the consistency is incredibly important. We've been fortunate to be able to develop a lot of capital sources as an industry over a period of time, and they have innovated with us as the market constructs have changed. If there's one area where I'd love to see additional focus, it is on the innovation side. I mean, I think there's a common theme that we'll talk about this week, where we've got a good amount of investment dollars on innovative companies that are just getting started. We've got a good amount of investment for the folks that are scaling infrastructure, providing capital to us, companies like us that are investing in these projects. It's really in that middle where we've got some promising technologies, but they're not quite ready to be commercialized, that we really need to make sure are thriving because they are the technologies we're going to need in the next decade.
Let me put you on the spot. How does a regulated utility, an investor-owned utility, compete that has rate payers and, of course, a regulated framework from the Utility Commission, how do they compete with Amazon and Microsoft and Google for the power, the clean power that you're generating?
I'd change the conversation a little bit. I don't think it's a compete. I think it is a partner with. You know, these companies, just like the manufacturers, just like the industrial loads, absolutely need the utilities to thrive. They need them to be able to serve the 5 nines of reliability that they are counting on in order to provide the data and insights we all will enjoy from their products. So it needs to be a partnership. The challenge that we have today from a regulatory perspective is it is going to cost more to serve these new 7x24 loads than the existing resources that we have in place, because many of those are very depreciated. So they've been in service for a long period of time, they're lower cost, versus the new resources that need to be deployed. That's a tough policy question. Fortunately, for many of them, they're willing to pay, but we need to work through the regulatory construct, and we need to make sure that the electrons still are affordable for the rest of us that need to turn on the lights every day.
Right. Well, I think we can appreciate that we need the world's largest renewable energy provider to be successful, and we need all the startups around the world to do the same. And thank you very much. So appreciate your insight and your counsel, and let's hope that some of the state policymakers and some of the private market folks here can really appreciate the need for this. With that, I want to thank you all for joining us. It is an incredible honor to welcome our distinguished chair of the board of the Climate Group, but also former senator, former governor, but also one of the real thought leaders in this country and around the world in the link between climate and innovation, Governor Bill Ritter.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Carlisle. I'm joined on stage by Carol Browner, former administrator of the EPA and in the Clinton administration, former climate czar for the Obama administration. We're going to speed date because we're going to speed things up a little bit. Carol's got another place to be after that. So really we have one question, and it's something that's been alluded to a few times on stage today. This is about ensuring long-term impact, but really about durability. As an administrator of the EPA, you experience this. You get sued if you get sued by somebody when you pass really important rules. And now we've seen different things happen where the EPA has struggled a bit in the courts. And so, Carol, at the state and the federal level, how do we do the kind of work we need to do, whether it's the rulemaking from the Inflation Reduction Act, the 111D, 111B, how do we do that and ensure that those rules will be durable, even in a court system that can be kind of uncertain?
Well, thank you. And first of all, I want to thank you for all of your leadership on the climate issues. You have been, you were an awesome governor, and you've been awesome since then, so thank you. What do we do? Well, the first thing is we dot our I's and we cross our T's when it comes to the regulations, right? We have to be really careful. Ricky Revesz, people like him who have really skilled in making sure the regulations are as defensible as possible. When I was at EPA, we set the first ever fine particle standard. We litigated it on something called the major questions doctrine, which no one had ever heard of back then, non-delegation doctrine, all the way to the Supreme Court. We won 9-0 with Scalia writing the majority opinion. I am sure that will be overturned in the not too distant future. So it is more challenging, without a doubt. But we need regulations, and we need to enforce regulations. They're only good if you actually enforce them. And so I agree with Michael, the administrator. You know, they've got to be more careful. They've got to stay in a narrower lane than we were able to operate in. I think the second thing is we need to invest. And the Biden administration, it is like an industrial revolution, the way we are investing in clean energy, the way we're investing in the future. And I think we need to, whether we're at the federal government or state and the whole government, we need to be willing to take some risks. And this is really hard for government leaders, right? Because of the criticism, the oversight hearings that can come. But when you think about all of the money we're investing in clean energy, simply investing in companies or new technologies that Wall Street would invest in doesn't make a lot of sense. The government should be out there taking a little bit more risk. And so I think it's an incredibly exciting time. It's a challenging time. And so the final thing I would say is we have to continue to engage the public. You know, a lot of us who have been working on climate change for a long time, for a while we had a saying, well, it doesn't matter what you think about climate change because green investments are, you know, good jobs. And I had an epiphany a couple years ago where I thought, it does matter what you think about climate change. It really does, because there's science behind it. And we should not give people a pass on science. We can have a debate on what you do about it. You could decide to do nothing. I don't agree. You could decide to invest. I agree. But this idea that the public should get a pass on, is climate change real or not, is the science there. And so I think continuing to engage the public is really important.
Turns out that science actually doesn't care what we think, right? It's going to be the science and it's going to be the facts. And I think those are such great points. But I also think that generally Americans like clean air and clean water.
You think?
Yeah, I do. And so just as closing comment and a former EPA administrator, how do we communicate that, the importance of clean air and clean water to America in such a way that it helps these kinds of laws have the durability they need?
Yeah, I think it's important to get out there and talk about it. When I was at EPA, we were shut down by Gingrich 3 separate times. Our budget was not funded. And I realized that the public was somewhat supportive of that, or at least some percentage of the public, because they didn't know what we did. And so we had to go out there and explain, you know, what we do is not just about protecting the beautiful places you visit on your family vacation. It's about protecting where you live your life, how you live your life. It's about protecting the health of your children, the health of your community, the health of your food. And I think we just have to keep driving that message about these things are really shared values. They're important values. One of the things I get to do today, I'm with a law firm, Covington and Burling, and we navigate all the intricacies of the various laws that apply to clean energy and the Clean Air Act and, you know, on and on. But what I always realize when I'm working particularly with the younger lawyers is that's great to understand all the nuances, but if we don't have a narrative, if we're not telling a story, it's hard, sometimes even for the clients to understand, but certainly hard for the public to understand.
And I think the clean air, clean water narrative can be simple and understandable and critical to our future.
So, quick little piece of trivia. The Clean Water Act, I think, is like 60 years old. Someone can correct me. Do you know what the goal of the Clean Water Act was? Think about this. Congress passed this. Fishable and swimmable. Not 20% cleaner, 30% cleaner. Fishable and swimmable. The ambient air quality standards, the NAC standards for EPA, protect the public health with a margin of safety on the best available science.
Yes.
Pretty amazing provisions.
I know.
And we need to continue on that path. Thank you guys for everything you're doing and so many great leaders here and to be able to be with you.
Thank you, Carol. It's great being with you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. Huge round of applause. Thank you, Governor Ritter. So next, we are so honored to have a quick keynote address from Ali Zaidi, Assistant to the President and National Climate Advisor. In his role, Ali leads the White House Climate Policy Office, overseeing the coordination of President Biden's all-of-government approach to tackle the climate crisis, create good-paying jobs, union jobs, and advance the environmental justice. From the Biden campaign to the White House, Ali has played a pivotal role in shaping U.S. climate policy, helping secure historic wins through the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. He has been a leader in reestablishing U.S. climate leadership, driving forward efforts to cut emissions, deliver robust executive actions, and advance clean energy innovation. Ali brings unique cross-sector and multidisciplinary background, having served in key roles in both the Obama, Biden, and Biden-Harris administrations, and as a leader in New York State's climate efforts. Please join me in welcoming Ali Zaidi to speak next.
Hey everybody, it's wonderful to be with you. I think a short keynote is twice the length of the introduction, so I'll try to keep it brief. It's really quite a remarkable moment that we find ourselves in, where the climate movement is the dog that caught the car for a really long time. We've been talking about climate policy at the federal level that matches the scale of the problem that we face down. And it's been a conversation that has gone through boom and bust. And then over the last 3.5 years, not only in the historic Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure law, but frankly in the hundreds of actions that make up together the climate strategy of the Biden-Harris administration, I think we have risen to the moment. If you think back 3.5 years and tell your past selves that the United States would have doubled its pace of decarbonization, that in the agriculture sector we would have signed up 80,000 farms, 75 million acres, to climate-smart agriculture practices, that in the building sector we would have had millions of Americans just in calendar year 2023 draw down Biden-Harris tax credits to retrofit their homes, that the Department of Energy would have finalized standards that together result in $1 trillion of energy savings and the resulting greenhouse gas benefit, that in the industrial sector, we would no longer be staring at something that felt too hard to decarbonize, but instead we would be staring at plants being constructed in the United States that are making clean cement and clean aluminum and flat glass that is clean, and engaged, as I am, in a conversation with the EU and other partners around the world on evolving institutions.
So up next, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing two wonderful panelists who are going to be joining us to have a fantastic conversation, so thanks for sticking through. We're going to explore the vital link between conservation, biodiversity, and climate resilience, all within the framework of the Inflation Reduction Act. This panel is going to dive into how federal and state initiatives can align to protect ecosystems while advancing our climate goals. Leading this discussion is Mike McGuire, the Senate President Pro Tem of the California State Senate. Senator McGuire has long been a champion for environmental issues and represents a district that stretches from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Oregon border. We are so thrilled to have you guiding our conversation here today. And with that, I'll also ask up Dr. Elizabeth Gray, but I do know that the Pro Tem is ready to introduce you as well.
How's everybody doing? Hey, there we go. Well, good afternoon and welcome back. First and foremost, we want to say thank you so much for hanging with us. And before we get to the good doctor, I'd like to be able to acknowledge we have 10 incredible members of the California State Senate who are here today, environmental champions, not just for the Golden State, but for the United States of America. If we could please give them a round of applause and they could raise their hand. Thank you. So we're going to continue our conversation on the Inflation Reduction Act. And we're going to talk about how it's being implemented on the ground. And we want to welcome truly one of the hardest working environmental organization CEOs in the United States of America. She's the first woman to take over as CEO for the Audobon Society. Can we please give a warm welcome, please, to Dr. Elizabeth Gray, ladies and gentlemen. My goodness, we're so excited you're here, Doctor. She is an environmental champion. She's a climate champion, and she has taken over after 120 years and never having a woman in the lead. And we are so excited that she's going to be there. She's so incredibly capable. And she's taken on a really big challenge. There are two major issues facing birds across the United States and, of course, throughout the world. That's climate change and habitat loss. And we know that exact thing here in the Golden State. 2/3 of species in North America come through California every year, and we want to say thank you for the Audubon Society's amazing work. Will you please give Audubon another round of applause, please? So, Dr. Gray, we're so excited that you're here today. We have some questions for you. We're going to get right into it right now. So you have an intense focus on this dual crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss. So we would like to be able to talk about what is the strategy that you've taken over 3.5 years ago, strategy to tackle those two major challenges facing, of course, birds and the organization.
Well, thank you, Senator McGuire. It's great to be here with you.
It's good to see you.
So Audubon has a superpower, and that superpower is birds. And that's because birds are the ultimate environmental indicator. They are the proverbial canary in the coal mine. They have that tag for a reason. So we know that birds, if they're doing well, the planet's doing well. If they're doing poorly, the planet's doing poorly. So we've been listening to birds at Audubon for 120 years. And what they've been telling us is that since I was born, we've lost 3 billion birds. Jesus. 3 billion birds in North America. And 2/3 of the birds that are still here are threatened by climate. So what's going on? Well, certainly we're seeing biodiversity loss, and that's being impacted and magnified by climate change. So at Audubon, we think of biodiversity loss and climate change as two sides of the same coin. So they're intertwined crises. You cannot tackle one without tackling the other. And so we have this very big, bold, new strategic plan called Flight Plan that is tackling both of these crises at the same time.
And we're going to talk about the strategic plan because it's one of the most aggressive plans that the Audubon Society has ever launched. Let's touch on the IRA for a little bit. Yeah. We've had a lot of governmental representatives talking about the importance of the IRA. But you were implementing it, and it's been a game changer for yourself and for the 700 team members who belong to the Audubon Society, who are working every day on this dual crisis. What has the IRA meant for the Audubon Society?
Yeah, well, so the IRA is a historic investment, and it's a historic step forward. But we want to take a leap forward, right? So we really have to be working together. Audubon's working with industry, we're working with scientists, with policymakers, and with local communities to help turn that historic investment of money into projects on the ground. And you know all about this. And so one of the things that's been really interesting as we've been helping move the historic investment into on-the-ground projects is people will often ask me, what happens in November? What's going to happen? And is that still going to be possible?
Is it okay if I knock on wood right now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
So one of the things I love to talk about is, as you said, Audubon's been around for 120 years. We've weathered 30 presidential administrations. Each has had its own challenges, its own opportunities, and we still have had a lot of action. So in 1918, we passed the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. That was under a Democratic administration, and that put one of the strongest protections for protecting non-game species in the US. It's still a huge piece of legislation today. In 1973, Endangered Species Act under a Republican administration, and protecting threatened and endangered species and their habitats. And then, things are divided right now, but we had bipartisan support for the Migratory Bird Conservation Act just last year. And so the point is, the Inflation Reduction Act is driving money to on-the-ground projects. That's going to continue as we move forward. We're still going to have Audubon committed to climate and conservation action, putting projects in on the ground, working together, bringing people from different sectors to make that happen.
Madam CEO, when you take a look, though, at the last 120 years, there's been nothing like what we're seeing right now with the climate crisis. Right. And what does that look like? There's been incredible investment, time, effort, energy, incredible policy, but we've also never faced this as a planet. So what does that mean getting beyond North America and for loss of bird species across the planet? What do you see right now? If you don't mind giving us a glimpse.
Well, never have issues been so urgent. I mean, I do say to people, our generation will be defined by what we do on climate. This will be your legacy. This will be all of our legacies, right? The younger generation is looking at us and they're saying, we need action now. And so that is another great thing about Audubon. We work with a lot of folks in college campuses and trying to bring up younger generation and help people understand that everybody needs to care about the environment. everybody needs to care about the climate, and everybody, no matter who you are, can take action to help make this world a better place and to protect the planet.
I think the other piece on birding, which I had no idea, not only is the Audubon Society doing amazing work on the climate crisis, but birding is also a major economic driver for many rural communities, multi-billion-dollar driver for our economy as well.
It is. One of the things that was so interesting to me, so I started at Audubon during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And a lot of people found solace. They turned to bird watching during the pandemic. And so actually the number of bird lovers, the number of folks that are enjoying watching birds, studying birds, making lists of the birds they've seen, it literally doubled since the pandemic. Wow. 96 million self-identified people in the United States spend time watching birds. That is an incredible number of people. And so the fact that, I love birds for many reasons. They bring me joy. They help me understand what's going on with the planet. They help, I think, bring magic into people's lives, as well as have a practical use in terms of what's the state of the environment. So you can tell, I love birds, and that's probably why I'm at Audubon.
Also has her PhD as well, focusing on birding, and just want to say thank you for your amazing work. Let's talk about this flight plan. You have launched an unprecedented 5-year strategic plan for the organization. Never been done before in the organization in its 120 years. Talk about what this 5-year flight plan is going to mean, and what should we expect from the Audubon Society over the next half decade?
So because we've lost 3 billion birds since I was born, we basically call that a decline. It's a decline of birds across the hemisphere. So our job is to halt and ultimately reverse this decline of birds. We call this bending the bird curve. So that's our vision. We're out every day. People come to work at Audubon to bend the bird curve. So how are we doing that? Well, first, we're working to build a connected, climate-resilient landscape across the Americas, where birds can thrive, where communities can thrive. The beauty about protecting habitat is that there's co-benefits. Mm-hmm. You can sequester and store carbon. You know this. Yeah. Our forests, our wetlands, our grasslands, those habitats hold carbon. As you restore them, you can sequester more. So there's a dual benefit there. And then we're also working to accelerate renewable energy across the landscape. And this has been really interesting for Audubon because a lot of environmental organizations, a lot of bird organizations were a little hesitant to get into this space. There's trade-offs in this space. There's not a solution for accelerating renewables that doesn't have impact. But at Audubon, we took a look and we said the impacts to birds will be much less by helping to accelerate renewables across the landscape than to not do anything on climate change. So that's another big piece of this. How do you accelerate enough renewables to power 75 million homes? And so this is where we're focused under this ambitious plan. And we are committed to bending that bird curve and making this planet better for birds and for people.
As CEO with a plan, we are now going to put 60 seconds on the clock as we have our last 4 questions, rapid fire questions. Madam CEO, are you ready to go? And then we're going to wrap up and turn it back over to Angela. So here we go. 60 seconds is now on the clock.
Oh boy.
And I know birds are like kids. You can't have a favorite.
That's right.
But no one can record this. Ready, go, your favorite bird.
I can't have a favorite bird as the CEO. Hold on. However, the bald eagle's super special to me. I'll take just a second to say I grew up outside the nation's capital. I always wanted to see a bald eagle. I had to go west to see my first bald eagle in the wild. I moved back about 10 years ago. Now there are bald eagles along the Potomac. That is a story of resilience. That is a story of adaptability.
I love it. Is it wrong if I like crows and chickens?
No, corvids are one of the smartest bird groups.
I love crows. Oh my gosh, they are the best.
They are.
Yes. All right. Best place to bird on the planet is where? You've lived all across the planet. Best place to bird.
Depends what you're looking for, but I'll say 2 things.
Maybe
One,
I'm not going to pin you down on these.
I met my husband in the Great Basin of California, so I just have to bring it back to your state.
There we go.
One of the wonderful places to bird.
I heard you say California is your favorite place. Okay, there we go. Thank you. All right, you are so incredibly busy. She is literally on the road the majority of this month. But what is the last show you binge watched?
My guilty pleasure is I'm in season 8 of Suits. I missed it the
Oh,
first time
Suits, hey, there
around,
we go.
so I'm now catching up.
I love it. You have 2 incredible kids, a boy and girl in their 20s. You are a working mom, and you've accomplished so much. What is the best advice that you would give to women leaders who want to achieve becoming a CEO, whether it's in the corporate world or in the nonprofit world? Best advice to women leaders.
Yeah, such a great question. I would say dream big, don't play small, figure out how you want to change the world, and go for it.
And that's exactly what Dr. Gray is doing. Can we please give a round of applause to Dr. Elizabeth Gray, CEO, the first in 120 years from the Audubon Society. Ladies and gentlemen, speaking of women leaders, can we please give it up for Angela? She's done a phenomenal job, CEO of the Climate Group North America. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, guys, well, we've made it this far. And if you give me 2 seconds, I want to wrap us up. A huge round of applause for the Pro Tem and for Elizabeth Gray. Thank you so much. So the final words I leave you with, obviously, is something I think has come up in many of these sessions, is that all of us have it in our hands to make the change that we're asking for. So for those in government, your leadership and your policies create the framework and momentum for change. And advocacy and NGO leaders, push, keep going. We gotta keep fighting, and we gotta hold everyone accountable. And the most important thing is don't wait. I know we have this grand message of it's time, but really it's time even here today. Turn to your left, turn to your right. There are people here who can help you get your climate goal forward, and things that can also collectively can't be done all individually. So let's work together across industries, across borders, across political lines to reach these incredibly important climate goals. So I leave you with one challenge. When you leave here today, what can you do today, tomorrow, next week, next month, and at next Climate Week, or at the U.S. Climate Action Summit on April 24th, where we will be having these discussions once again. What are you bringing to those conversations? What resources, what challenges, and how can I hold you accountable? Because there's no time to waste, as we know, and the time to act is now. So let's get to work. Thank you, everybody, and thanks for attending.